Survey of the Old Testament. This is lesson 28. I hope to get done by the end of the year. Bill and I have been talking about our classes, and if I do get done by the end of the year, I'd like to start teaching the book of Romans come January. It's a very rich book, very rich, and it's full of information. But for now, I want to try something on our study of the Old Testament kings at this point, or the last period of history in the Old Testament. And based on how it goes, if it's interesting, I'll probably pursue the same course. If it's not that interesting, I'll wind it up. But we'll have to see how that goes as we proceed. We're dealing with the divided kingdom. This is our third lesson on this particular subject. Last week, what we took a look at was Jeroboam and what's simply known as the young prophet in 1 Kings 13. Very well known piece of history that took place long ago. One of the things we noted, what happened to Jeroboam, he repented, but that didn't last long. In 1 Kings 13:33, after this event, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. The key there is after this event. What event was that? That's the death of the young prophet. After the young prophet was killed by a lion who obviously was sent to kill him by Jehovah God, Jeroboam had a change of heart. Perhaps he thought maybe this man wasn't from God after all. Perhaps he got his due for what he said to me. I don't know what went through this man's mind, but because of the transgression of the young prophet, Jeroboam, who had repented, which probably wouldn't have lasted long anyway, he turned back to his former ways. He continued to worship the golden calves in Israel. And of course, that led to the downfall of the nation. This thing became sin to the house of Jeroboam so as to cut it off. The idea of the kings is that it's a father, son, father, son, father, son. The son takes the throne of the father. But if Jehovah has a problem with the father, he won't let his descendants hold on to the throne. He'll take it from them. And what we find in the northern kingdom is that there are a few times when the son got the throne of the father. But most of the time, that's not what happened. Usually a king was murdered by somebody, and he would take the throne for himself. In Judah, it was different, though. The kings had to be from the tribe of Judah. So it followed the lineage of father, son, father, son. There was one exception to the rule, and that's when a woman reigned on the throne of Judah. Her name was Athaliah. I can't remember off the top of my head how many years she reigned. It seemed like it was 7 or something like that. But she reigned for 7 years, and finally she got what was coming to her. And the throne went back to the seat of David. But Jeroboam, because of his sin, God wanted his descendants to be the kings of Israel. And because of his sin against God, God had a change of heart. He would take the throne away from his family. He would cut his family off from the face of the earth. Now, the Lord wants us to understand, while we're reading all this about going on in Israel, in the 14th chapter, he interjects the fact that even though Israel looks like it's really going wrong, he wants us to understand that Judah was equally going wrong at the same time. And a few of the things he says in verse 22, for example, Judah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they, that would be the people of Judah, they provoked God to jealousy with their sins that they committed more than all that their fathers had done. For they also built for themselves high places, they also, like Israel did, and pillars and Asherim on every hill and under every green tree. There were also male cult prostitutes in the land. And they did according to all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. Homosexuality was prevalent at this time. You know, people today, you talk about homosexuality, this is a new thing, we're coming out and all this other silly stuff. Fact of the matter is, it's always been out. Back in at this time, there were many homosexuals in both Judah and Israel, and they were practicing homosexuality because this is what the Canaanites were doing. And they wanted to be like them, so they started doing what they did. So they engaged in the same sins. What's called a new movement forward and all this other nonsense, it's not a movement forward, it's simply a step back in history. That's all it is. Nothing new under the sun. The next king we look at, according to chronology, is Abijah, also known as Abijam. He's the second king of Judah. He's the son of Rehoboam. You read about him in 1 Kings 14:31 through 15 verse 8. Also 2 Chronicles chapter 13. He reigned only 3 years, and that was between the years 913 and 910 BC. He was a sorry king. He was evil, like his father. While Abijah reigned over Judah, Jeroboam was reigning over Israel. They were contemporaries for part of Jeroboam's reign. You remember that Rehoboam reigned 17 years, Jeroboam reigned 20 years. Jeroboam lived 5 years and reigned after the death of Rehoboam of Judah. Well, during this time, Rehoboam's son Abijah, he reigned during the period of the 18th, 19th, and 20th years of Jeroboam. There's a chart I made. I don't know if I passed it out or not. I don't even remember. But on the chart, you can keep up with the kings, who the kings were, who was the king of Israel, and who was the king of Judah at the same time. So as you study the Old Testament, you can keep all this stuff together because it gets hard to hold on to. Some of the kings, of Judah and Israel, they got the same names. At one time, there was a king in Judah and a king in Israel, and they both had the same names. Well, when you read it, it's easy to get confused as to which king you're talking about. But that chart, it'll show you on that chart what's going on, who's who. Abijah is the son of Maacah. Maacah is his mama. Maacah is the mother of Rehoboam, and Maacah is the daughter of Jeroboam. Boy, talk about Christmas at their house, huh? Rehoboam, Jeroboam, they hate each other. But Rehoboam's married to Jeroboam's daughter. But Jeroboam's daughter loves her daddy. She's an idolater. She may be one of the reasons why idolatry was so prevalent in Judah during her time. But one of the things you notice, and it stands to reason, is the influence Mama's going to have over the son. Rehoboam was an idolater also, not to the same degree as his wife was. She was raised in that. That's what she knew. That's all she knew. And she was in it up over her top of her head. And her son, no doubt, was under the influence of Mama. And therefore, the decisions he made during his reign are going to be greatly influenced by her. The Lord said about Abijah in 1 Kings 15:3, he walked in all the sins that his father did before him. His heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. One of the things you notice, and you need to catch this though, is Abijah is called the son of David. David is his father. They don't use the word grandfather. okay? According to the way they spoke at that time, I would be the father of Isabella and Allie because I'm the patriarch over Chris's family. So his children would be my children. They didn't have grandchildren or grandfather. And it can go all the way, it can go down 15 generations. They would be called, 15 generations later, it'd be called the son of David, or David his father. So just because you read about somebody, David is his father, that doesn't mean he's the actual son of David. He may be the great, 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 great grandson of David. And you want to keep that in mind when you read, because they don't use the same terminology that we do today. The Abijah, there was two great sins, I think, that he committed. Number one, he continued the idolatry and the wickedness of his daddy, no doubt partly due to the influence of his mama. The worship of Asherah, she's the Canaanite goddess of fertility. Now you can imagine what they done in their worship services, okay? One of the things about pagan worship that's very common, even in India today, they got a lot of heathenistic worship besides worshiping elephants and stuff like that. But their worship always involves carnal indulgences of the flesh. Sometimes thousands of people come together. You got husbands and wives. They all come together and they all get mixed up. And they act like a bunch of dogs for a week or however long the festival continues. These are the kinds of sins that you're talking about. They're the grossest sins imaginable. That's like, there's a song, oh Lord, if you're looking below, it's worse now than then. No, it's not. No, it's not. We don't have that going on here in our country. It's not worse now than then. People have been much, much worse in the past. And that's what you see at this particular time. A goddess of fertility, she makes people fertile for childbearing, and of course in their worship is going to be, they're going to be involved in carnal activities. In 1 Kings 15, 4 and 5, we discovered that God's promise to David was the only thing that saved this man's family from the same fate of Jeroboam. Remember what God said to Jeroboam. He said, I'm going to cut your family off from the face of the earth. There's not going to be any trace of you anywhere. And he did that very thing. All of his descendants were destroyed. He would have done the exact same thing to this man, except for the fact that God had promised David that through his seed the Messiah would come. And therefore he spared this man's life and allowed the lineage of Judah to continue to sit on the throne of Judah. Sometimes a grandfather, for example, could be a blessing to a grandchild because of the deeds of the grandfather. God may extend a blessing to the grandchild. It works that way sometimes. Secondly, there was a full-scale war between Israel and Judah. Up to this time, there'd been a lot of skirmishes between the two nations, guerrilla warfare. Abijah, however, he went full steam ahead in war with Israel. And it was kind of odd that he would do that because they outnumbered him 3-1. I mean, frankly, I think they could have, had it not been for divine intervention, I think they could have smashed him. But that's not what happened. He made an appeal to God for victory. Now, I want you to remember this guy, what he's like. He's a terribly, terribly gross sinner. And he's going to go to war with Israel, and he prays to God, God, let me have the victory over Israel. Well, God doesn't hear the prayer of a sinner. Well, God did hear his prayer, and he gave him the victory. He was victorious. But why? Was it because he prayed and God responded to his prayer? Or did God allow him to be victorious because Abijah's son, whose name is Asa, he's going to initiate a great revival in Israel. When his son takes the throne over the time that he'll reign as the king, there's going to be a great revival. The religion of the Jews is going to be reinitiated, and there's going to be a great turning towards Jehovah God. And this is what I would venture to suppose, is that the Lord gave this victory to Abijah, not for his sake, but for the sake of the next generation and what was going to take place. Everybody was going to know, out of all the gods that they worship in Judah, only one God came to their rescue, and that was Jehovah. Well, you know, if Jehovah came to their rescue, the people are going to be kindly disposed to Jehovah. And I think that may be one of the reasons why Asa only survived 3 years as king, so his son could go ahead and occupy the throne and commence with that revival. Asa is much more popular than his daddy ever hoped to be. He reigned much longer. We read about him in 1 Kings 15 and also 2 Chronicles chapters 14, 15, and 16. He occupies a lot of space in the Bible, and that tells us he did a lot of things, okay? Some guys only occupy a couple verses. But Asa, he occupies quite a bit of the divine record. He reigned for 41 years between the years 910 and 869 BC. So the first three kings of Judah, Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa. Reigning contemporary to them in Israel was Jeroboam. Jeroboam reigned during the entirety of the administrations of Rehoboam and Abijah, and he reigned 2 years contemporary with Asa. Now, if you're a diligent Bible student and you study the Old Testament scriptures, these are the kinds of things you really want to know, because it helps us understand what's going on. We're trying to understand the historical record of the Old Testament. God gave us the historical record. He wants us to understand the history of Israel. And in order for us to do that, we have to know things like this. These things I know is humdrum and all that stuff, but if you're the kind of a person who truly wants to know God, these are the kinds of things you're going to want to understand and know, because it will be very helpful in your studies. In 1 Kings 15, verses 11 and 12, Asa did what was right. Unlike his father and grandfather, in the eyes of the Lord, he was more like David, his father, as he had done. He put away the male prostitutes out of the land. He outlawed all that stuff. He removed all the idols that his daddy had made. He also removed she's called his mother. She was actually his grandmother. But she had a job, as they created a job called a queen mother. Rehoboam, I guess, created that job, and with it came some authority. Well, when her grandson became king, he kicked her out. He dissolved the job. She was out of work. She went to the unemployment line. He did that because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. His mama was sorry. His daddy was sorry. But he came out good. Asa did. And he started a great revival in the nation. He cut down her image, that is Asherah, and he burned it at the brook Kidron that we read about and are familiar with in the New Testament. But the high places were not taken away, not because of a lack of want, because of a lack of opportunity. That's the only reason he didn't go that far. Had he had the opportunity, he would have taken out the high places. Are places smattered all over the country where people would go and worship. Over in India, Bill and Farland have seen it. You can't drive over a mile without seeing a place where people can go and worship. These are what we're talking about. These things on the high places where people worship. There are thousands of them all over the country. And it's going to take a lot of time to take all that stuff out. It's not because of a lack of a desire. It's because a lack of opportunity. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was wholly true to the Lord all his days. Pay attention to that. All his days. He was wholly true to the Lord. Because what we're going to discover is that he was not wholly true to the Lord all his days. But in the meantime, during his younger days, he brought into the house of the Lord the sacred gifts of his father, his own sacred gifts, silver, gold, vessels. He took his father's wealth, at least part of it. He took his wealth, at least part of it, and he donated all this stuff to the temple. The temple had been abandoned during the reign of Rehoboam and Abijah because idolatry was the thing. Heathenism, paganism, that was the rule of the day. So nobody was taking care of the temple. I guess, truth be told, they were probably robbing the place. So one of the things he does is he takes the wealth of his daddy, he takes his own wealth, he puts it into the temple to try to make Solomon's temple the beautiful place that it once was. So, I mean, he's looking really, really good. During the early days of his reign, it was a time of peace. Now, here's something to think about. Rehoboam died at the age of 58, and then his son Abijah died 3 years later, and then Asa comes to the throne then. I would think that he was relatively young when he became king. He may have been as young as 10 years old, something like that. And that would make sense if that were the case. His mother, his father, his grandfather, his grandmother, they were all steeped in idolatry. They lived like dogs. But Asa, he comes out like a shining diamond. Well, how do you account for that? Well, this could be what happened. It's very possible that his daddy dying at a young age, he would naturally become king, but he may be very young, and if he is very young, he's going to live with a high priest. That's where the king lived, with a high priest. If he was too young to take care of himself, it was the responsibility of the high priest to raise the king. And this may very well be what happened to Asa. That would account for his godliness. That would explain why he was so devoted to Jehovah. He had been taught about the God of heaven instead of the paganistic ways of his family. And not only that, the high priest would not only raise him, but he would rule the country during the time that the boy was too young to do it himself. So we see this great shift, this great religious revival that takes place in Judah. It happens a few times along and along. This is the first great revival in the country, and it took place during the reign of the third king. Some of the reasons for peace: number one, Israel hadn't recovered from war. Remember, Abijah went to war with Israel, and boy, he just whooped them good because God gave him the victory. Well, Israel wasn't in any shape to hassle Judah. They're still licking their wounds. They're still trying to recover. So you got no problem from the north, from Israel. Secondly, Israel was torn by a revolution. Remember, Asa only reigned 2 years contemporary with Jeroboam. When Jeroboam died, everybody and their brother wanted to be king. And they were fighting for it. They were killing each other for it. They didn't have time to fool with Judah. They were too busy trying to figure out who would be king for more than a week, because it was everything was running amok in the country. Thirdly, Egypt underwent a change in dynasties. By a change of dynasties, You know, we read in the Bible, there arose a king who did not know Joseph. Now, we know what that means. There was a king who came up who didn't understand what Joseph had done for Egypt. Therefore, he felt no obligation to be good to Joseph and his family. Instead, he turned them into slaves. Well, what does that mean? There arose a king. What actually happened, we know this from history, is that there was a change in dynasties. So another people, I hate to call them a nation because they weren't always nations, but another people had conquered the rulers of Egypt. They wiped them all out, and when they did, they stepped up in their place, and now the country, they say, belongs to me, and everybody works for me. It's a change in dynasties. Between the time that Joseph served the Pharaoh and there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, there were 4 different dynasties that arose. So there arose a king who did not know Joseph, the reason being he come out of Europe. He didn't know who Joseph was or what he had done. Well, this is what's happened in Egypt again. There's another change in dynasties during this time. And because there's war in Egypt, somebody's trying to hold power, somebody's trying to steal power, you got no time to mess around with Judah. So there's no problems from the south. And fourth, during Abijah's reign, there had been a league, an agreement between the king of Syria and himself. They were going to get along. Judah paid him so much money, and they left him alone, basically. So this agreement continued into the reign of Asa. So what you're seeing here is divine providence at work. Sometimes, I know we say God is everywhere and God's always working. I don't know that we always believe that, but here you see the fingerprints of God all over this. Asa is the king. He's going to initiate a great revival in Judah. The Lord is setting the stage. None of the surrounding nations are going to bother them during this time period. He's going to have sufficient time. He's got the heart to initiate a great revival. And before any problems arises in his administration, he's going to have the people of Judah worshiping Jehovah again. And homosexuality, the prostitutes in these houses of worship, like with Asherah and all that stuff, it's against the law. You do that stuff now, you go to jail, or you'll die. This all happened during the reign of Asa. So it appears that God has set the stage so that Judah can go from what's become a very sick society to a very healthy society. And that's important. Why? Because what happens when a nation's cup of iniquity is full? God has to destroy them. He can't destroy the Canaanites when their cup of iniquity was full and not destroy the people of Judah. If he did, he'd be a respecter of persons, but he's not a respecter of persons. But he made a promise to Abraham. He made a promise to David that through their seed the Messiah would come. What happens if God does nothing and he allows Judah to continue to deteriorate? What's going to happen? Ultimately, he's going to have to destroy them. And when he destroys them, he can't keep his promise. But God always keeps his promise. Now, what you'll notice as you study the Old Testament, every so often you're going to see a great revival in the nation. And this, no doubt's got Jehovah's fingerprints all over it. He's calling the nation back to himself. He's trying to help them to become righteous so they don't continue to deteriorate, because if they keep getting worse and worse and worse, there's a line that a person can cross somewhere. I don't know where the line is, but when they cross that line, he cuts them off. And that can't happen to Judah. So during the reign of this young man, there's peace throughout the country, and it's purged of idolatry. The invasion of Syria, the Ethiopians, Libyans, Egyptians, eventually they all made a league and they decided to go whoop Judah. They outnumbered Judah greatly. Asa cried to the Lord his God, O Lord, there is none like you to help between the mighty and the weak. Help us, O Lord our God. We rely on you, and in your name we have come against this multitude of people. O Lord, you are our God. Let not man prevail against you. It's obvious that Asa was putting all of his ducks in one basket. Jehovah could give him the victory. And that's what he's making appeal to. And God did. He gave him the victory. So the Lord defeated the Ethiopians. Oh, you say no, it wasn't the military. It was the Lord who defeated them. Sometimes you think it's the military, and we give praise and glory to the military or the congressmen or the generals. It's the Lord who defeated the Ethiopians. And it was the Lord who should have been thanked for giving the battle to Asa and to Judah. And the Ethiopians had to flee and go back to where they came from. It was a great, powerful victory for Asa, and it greatly contributed to the revival of the nation. Everybody knew they had no chance to defeat these people. They were outnumbered by about 5 to 1 or something like that. They had no way they could win, but Jehovah stepped in. He gave them the battle. Now the people that haven't so far, they're going to look to Jehovah as a guide. Divine intervention, accelerated loyalty to God. Introducing idolatry after this event became a crime. If you built a high place, you'd be judged for that. If you talked about paganism or heathenism, you would be judged for that. It became a crime, and in many situations it was actually a capital crime. But this great man of faith did not always remain faithful to God. Baasha, the king of Israel, made a league with Syria. The king of Israel made a league with Syria. The two are going to join forces. They're going to go down south, and they're going to whoop up on Judah. Okay? What should Asa do? Well, what did he do the other time? He prayed to God, and God gave him the victory. What are you going to do this time, Asa? I'm going to pray to God. I prayed to God the last time. He gave me the victory. I'm going back to God because God gives me the victory. It's not what he did this time. Instead, Asa offered Baasha more money. Syria more money than Baasha had. Let's say Baasha offered him $10,000. Asa said, I'll give you 20 if you'll join forces with me. And he did. So Judah and Syria joined forces, and they whooped up on Israel. So he got his victory. But God wasn't very happy. At that time, Hananiah the seer came to Asa, the king of Judah, and he said to him, because you relied on the king of Syria, you did not rely on the Lord your God. Because your first inclination was to turn to a man to get you out of a dilemma, rather than turning to me, the Almighty God. You turned to the king of Syria. The army of the king of Syria has escaped you. God wasn't only going to give him victory over Israel, he was going to also give him victory over Syria. And that would have been a great battle, because Syria became a major thorn in the side of Judah. And if Asa had been faithful to God, Syria could have been taken out of the equation right then, and all the problems his descendants are going to face because of the Syrians, they wouldn't have had to face. Is that over? Well, I guess I'll stop right there. But it's a sad end to a great beginning. It's not enough to start well. You got to end well. And Asa didn't. He started wonderfully, but like Solomon, he ended on the wrong foot. We'll look at that more next week, God willing.